Hey everyone, it's your buddy back again with another exciting fanfic, which is, What If Naruto Hated His Own Teammates, Part 3. If you enjoy this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more fanfics like this. Now, let's dive right into the fanfic. Shut your mouth. Author's note. So, it's been quite some time. I had decided to put this fanfic on hiatus because of the stupid purges that happened thanks to the forum group of Critics United and Literate United, of whom decided to make themselves out as a censorship bureau and attempted to ban all fanfics they hated through bullying via flagging all stories they didn't like. Obviously, I wasn't about to continue my stories if it meant they all got deleted anyway. Things seem to have died down now, so I'm continuing the story at present. Another day of the second exam had passed. Squad 7 sat by a large pond and ate roasted fish by the campfire during nightfall. After staying with the unconscious members of Team 8 and Sakura until they recovered, they had bid farewell upon Shikamaru's insistence. Shikamaru argued that staying with Team 7 would put his own team in more danger than necessary. Ino gave the Earth Scroll to them after explaining that they had both scrolls already. None of them knew whether that was a lie or not. Sakura hoped that her friend's team passed the second phase. She didn't want Ino to lose on account of helping her. Naruto had located the pond they were currently camped near and sent out Kage Bunshin to acquire firewood while he spent time talking to Sakura about what happened during the time he and Sasuke were unconscious. Sasuke insisted upon catching the fish himself, arguing that Naruto shouldn't overwork his chakra and that he needed to adjust to his Sharingan's new ability regardless. At the moment, they sat quietly lost in their own little worlds of thought. Each would occasionally take a bite of their fish. Sasuke reminisced about what happened only a few days ago. It already felt like a lifetime ago. All three still felt surreal about an S-rank criminal attacking them in a Chunin exam. If not for the events themselves, Sasuke would have considered that it had all been an elaborate genjutsu. Yet, the fully developed Sharingan certainly wasn't faked. Sasuke suddenly thought of something. Naruto, broached Sasuke, causing Naruto to gaze at him. How come you haven't been testing out your dojutsu? Are you having trouble activating it? Naruto shook his head. He finished swallowing his fish before speaking. No, replied Naruto, I just don't want to use it. Sakura seemed to choke on her fish before she slowly chewed correctly and swallowed. Sasuke just stared at him expectantly. What? Questioned Sakura, giving him an odd look. Why not? Naruto, it gives you an unbelievable edge on the competition. Nobody will see it coming. We're talking about the legendary dojutsu that some people thought were a myth. You can't just not use it. It's a good thing to have, Naruto, added Sasuke. How can you not be happy about this? Even if it isn't divine, it's still a bloodline limit. Choosing not to use it would be a waste. Imagine all the great things that you can accomplish. We're taught from day one in the academy that shinobi should use their tools amidst danger, and that includes bloodline limits. Naruto sighed tiredly, closing his eyes in annoyance. He reopened them to focus on his friends. You two just don't understand, began Naruto demurely. Sasuke raised an eyebrow as Sakura folded her arms for an explanation. Yes, I have the eyes of the Messiah now, but that's not necessarily a good thing. I've been hated all my life for having the Kyuubi sealed inside of me. If the demon child suddenly shows up with the legendary Rinnegan, then what will people think? They've hated me for 6 years and they think I'm the demon itself. If I reveal that I have the Rinnegan, then who knows what most of them will do. I bet most will think that the demon spawn has perverted the religion somehow. Most of them don't even think I have a soul. I'd rather not place myself or any of you into any unnecessary danger. It's best that I keep it a secret. You're being a coward, said Sasuke plainly. He looked at Naruto squarely in the eyes as he said that, and you're smart enough to know that. Naruto, you can't just give in to fear. Giving in to fear ruins people. Not using your bloodline is a waste of potential. Naruto opened his mouth to speak in protest. His eyebrows had furrowed in a scowl. Sasuke gazed at him unfazed. Naruto, interrupted Sakura a bit hesitantly. Naruto closed his mouth and looked at her. He waited patiently as she gathered her thoughts so she could say what she wanted just right. You shouldn't let bias affect you this badly. That's not healthy at all. Sasuke and you both suffered terrible childhoods because of people's bias. What? said Naruto, confused by that statement. He had certainly suffered from people's prejudice, but how had Sasuke? What do you mean? Give me a minute, said Sakura, brainstorming the best way to articulate her reply. The other two waited patiently. Okay, you know how Sasuke's goal is to kill his brother. Well, after getting to know both of you more, I eventually realized that your backgrounds really cut deeply, but in entirely different ways. With you, Sasuke, it isn't just vengeance for your clan. It's a pride issue too. While your brother brought shame to the clan, in his own way, Itachi brought pride as well. He single-handedly killed an entire clan. He was argued to be the strongest Uchiha of our time because of his service record before he betrayed the village. How he ended up betraying Konoha reaffirmed that. People today compare Itachi to legends like Uchiha Madara and bring up similarities in their betrayal stories. Sasuke feels that he has to surpass Itachi's accomplishments, surpass the perceived expectations that his father had by constantly comparing his two sons, and fulfill the expectations that the people of Konoha have for him too. It's a lot to demand from him at such a young age. And alternatively, you, Naruto, continued Sakura, have the exact opposite problem. People don't expect anything but failure from you. You let fear rule you too much. It's become obvious to everyone who knows you well that you. Naruto held up a hand. Sakura stopped speaking and gave him a stern look. Look, I understand what you both mean, said Naruto finally. I've been hearing it for a long time now from Haku too. I'd rather not get into an argument about this. I'll use my Rinnegan under emergency situations only. Obviously, I'll use it during training sessions so I can learn how to use it properly. Other than that, I don't intend to use it at all. I don't want to go flaunting to the village that I have a bloodline. I'd rather not actively try to make them hate me. Sasuke rubbed the bridge of his nose in annoyance as Sakura sighed in exasperation. Sakura started eating her fish quietly. Sasuke just glanced at his fish in mild annoyance. Both refused to gaze in Naruto's direction. Naruto felt the air of disappointment surround him. He stubbornly took a bite of his fish in an effort to ignore the tension. Your choice, mumbled Sasuke, shrugging and taking a bite of his own fish. The subject was dropped, for now. What Naruto held back on saying was that he privately didn't want to admit that the demon within him was right. The next morning, Team 7 headed towards the tower for the next portion of the Chunin exams. They kept at a rapid pace to avoid other teams. The journey was quick and easy for them thanks to Sasuke's fully developed Sharingan and Naruto's chakra sensing ability. Once they had entered the tower, they unfurled the two scrolls in the designated location on the summoning ritual. Sasuke and Naruto stepped back as smoke began to filter from the summoning and a soft popping sound could be heard. The smoke receded to reveal Iruka. Congratulations, said Iruka, smiling at the three of them. You've passed the second exam with a whole day to spare. You all can go rest up in the sleeping quarters if you need it. If any of you are injured, then we have an infirmary within the tower to help any who need treatment. As your former academy sensei, let me just say that it was a pleasure to serve you three as my students. I'm honored and humbled by the fact that the three of you have come so far in military training. I admit, I was very skeptical about fresh out of the academy genins being sent to take the harsh Chunin exams in which survival and murder is common. I owe you three and the others of the academy an apology. I was biased because I still viewed all of you as children instead of soldiers. Iruka-san, you don't have to apologize, said Naruto, smiling with a bit of pride at Iruka's words. It's normal for a teacher to see his students as kids. Yeah, Iruka-sensei, said Sakura, agreeing, it's only normal. It's not like we gave you reason to see us as adults. Ino and I always acted stupid about Sasuke. Kiba's antics were annoying and angsty boy over here wasn't any better with his holier-than-thou attitude. Sakura had emphasized her point by dipping her head in Sasuke's direction. Sasuke scowled, snorted, and folded his arms defiantly. Iruka noticed the boy's lips moving subtly upwards to betray the fact that he was amused by Sakura's comment. Iruka smiled upon seeing that all three seemed to have matured since the last time he saw them interact at the Hokage's office. Team 7 went to rest within the sleeping quarters for the day. At night, Sasuke and Naruto were shaken awake by a very proud-looking Kakashi. Yo, said Kakashi with his patented greeting, Congratulations on passing the second exam. I would have woken Sakura too, but I can tell she needs her sleep. Naruto and Sasuke shared a smile at the praise. Pride surged through them both at the recognition of their accomplishment. Anyway, I've been sent to inform you three on the rules while the second exam is still in session and to ask if you noticed anything unusual or suspicious during the second exam. You mean like the legendary snake Sanin nearly killing us? Replied Sasuke sarcastically. Yeah, it was hard to miss when we were fighting for our lives. Kakashi snapped into attention. His body straightened and his face became more serious. Tell me everything, he demanded. His tone made it clear that there would be no room for sarcastic comebacks or arguments. Sasuke and Naruto launched into explanations at different points. Sasuke explained most of what transpired when facing Orochimaru since he had been conscious for the majority of it. Naruto filled in the little details that he couldn't explain Sakura's parts of the story. Sakura had informed him of what transpired in further detail during the campfire while Sasuke had been catching fish. Kakashi stayed silent for a few moments as he mulled over the fantastic story that he was just told. His face had remained neutral throughout most of the explanation. His eyes had widened during certain parts of the story concerning the Kyuubi using the Rinnegan, but otherwise he didn't give away his feelings. May I see the Rinnegan, Naruto? Asked Kakashi patiently. It's not that I don't believe you, but if I report that I've seen your Rinnegan for myself, then it'll be a better confirmation for the story given. This way, it'll legitimize the report since it's more plausible that an S-rank nuke nin put you three under genjutsu for some nefarious purpose. Naruto closed his eyes and reopened them to show the Rinnegan. Kakashi couldn't help but stare in mute surprise for a few seconds. It wasn't every day that the eyes of God were directed at you. Kakashi pushed his headband up and checked the chakra of both his male students with his Sharingan. His gaze shifted toward Sakura's direction and he noticed no foreign substance within any of their chakra. He covered his Sharingan eye once more. You may deactivate it, Naruto. Let Sakura know what I'm about to tell you now. All three of you have performed well beyond your call of duty as shinobi. I wish you all hadn't gone through such a horrifying ordeal, but you've performed amiably. Your show of teamwork in this exam is even greater now than when you faced Momochi Zabuza. I'll notify the Hokage of the full details of your excursion with Orochimaru immediately. I'm sorry to say that you won't get to rest more under the circumstances because of the inter-village exam rules, but your incredible show of bravery and teamwork will go on record. Pride swelled within Naruto and Sasuke at the praise given by their sensei yet again. Kakashi went into further details explaining that they couldn't leave the tower because it would violate the exam rules, but that they were free to use the facilities if needed. Sasuke and Naruto went back to sleep in their respective beds as Kakashi went to give his mission report to the Hokage. After a proper meal within the cafeteria the following day, they stood with the other victors of the second exam. The Genin team from Sound had been the last to make it before the time limit expired for the day. They had just barely made it in less than 10 minutes and the three appeared to be thoroughly exhausted. Naruto observed the other teams that had managed to complete the second phase. The Jinchuriki from Sand was definitely the most dangerous to face in the preliminary exam. Naruto desired to face either someone from the Sound team or the Uzumaki team to pay them back for what happened to Sakura in the forest. He knew Sasuke felt the same way. Naruto was usually non-confrontational in his approach with people to avoid unnecessary violence, but what those two teams had done just begged for an ass-kicking. He wasn't going to pretend to be complacent considering what happened. On the top of the platform, where the Hokage spoke to the prospective Chunins, stood the Junin senseis of the Genin teams that had made it. Curiously, the Sound Trio's Junin sensei wasn't among them. Naruto could not spot anyone with a Sound headband. The Sand team's Junin sensei was there. Team Uzumaki's Junin instructor stood amongst them as well. Uzumaki Kushina was clad in dark blue robes that were designed in a style similar to the Hokage. On the back of the formal and decorative outfit was a purplish Uzumaki swirl insignia. A mask of indifference was firmly on her visage as she peered below where the Genin stood. Her composure exuded an air of dignity and grace. Kushina was an attractive woman in her own right and her physical beauty put even Kurenai to shame. Naruto couldn't help but sneak glances in her direction. 6 years had passed since the last time he had seen his mother. When his cerulean blue eyes finally caught her steel blue, she didn't even spare him a second gaze. Naruto looked to the floor in self-loathing as he had noticed her face contorting in mild disgust before she continued her examination of the other genin. Maybe if I reveal the Rinnegan in my fight, thought Naruto pitifully, Ka-san will acknowledge me. Maybe she'll want me back, the Rinnegan is legendary so she is sure to. Despite this train of thought, Naruto was aware that he was just rationalizing the situation he was in. He couldn't know for sure what his mother would do. The clan had abandoned him for simply being a demon host, and it was entirely possible that they would see Naruto possessing the Rinnegan as sacrilegious to their beliefs. Naruto's gaze never left the floor as he sighed in depression once the logical side of his brain overtook the glimmer of hope that he had. If he revealed the Rinnegan, then it was possible that instead of being seen as a failure in the eyes of the clan, he would be seen as an enemy and the worst smear on the clan name. After the finishing speech, the genin were instructed to go onto the waiting platforms unless their name was called in the automated raffle. The names were randomized on the raffle board and the first two participants were chosen. After well-wishing from teammates, the two combatants began. Uchiha versus Uzumaki. Haku sat silently in the hospital room beside Karen. He sighed as he gazed at the still unconscious Uzumaki Karen on the hospital bed. 3 days had passed since he had brought both her and Mitarashi Anko to the hospital. In his haste, Haku had foolishly brought the summon within the bounds of the hospital, resulting in the doctors and nurses reacting in a panic. They had assumed that Orochimaru had come to attack the hospital and the Anbu were called immediately once one of them hit the alarm. It didn't help that Haku had the Kusanagi in his possession when he entered. Haku had to explain to the squad of Anbu the events that transpired in the Forest of Death so that they didn't shackle and throw him in prison for presumed treason. He had instantly ordered the snake to unsummon itself and had given the Anbu Kusanagi for inspection, but unfortunately the sword puffed out of existence the moment Haku handed the sword over. This confirmed that the sword was the authentic Kusanagi that was part of the snake summoning contract. Haku had learned too late that only those whom Manda, the ruler of the snake summons, or those a snake summoner deemed worthy could wield the sword. This fact brought even more suspicion on Haku. Due to the length of time this diversion took, Anko was pronounced dead on arrival once the doctors inspected her. Karen had been hauled to the special ward that was designed for the treatment of shinobi from affluent bloodline families. The Hokage had come soon afterwards as the Anbu wouldn't allow Haku to leave their presence until the Hokage made the final decision. Sarutobi had a grave expression on his face as he demanded that Haku explain what happened. Haku was quick to launch into an explanation of everything he could recall from the time Anko ordered them to search for Orochimaru to leaving the Forest of Death to rush them to the hospital. The Anbu hadn't believed the fanciful tale of AS rank missing Nin being beaten by a mere boy who had barely managed to rank as a Junin. The detail behind why Karen was unconscious increased their suspicion. He was now deemed a threat to the security of Konoha. Sarutobi had listened patiently. After his tale was finished, the Sandaime informed him that until Karen woke up they couldn't verify the authenticity of his story and he would be kept under surveillance by Anbu until Karen awoke from her coma. Haku had bowed his head respectfully and said that he understood. It was reasonable precautions given the circumstances. Haku was allowed to train and visit his teammate in the hospital, but he was allowed little else. He was indefinitely forbidden from the Uchiha district until Karen woke up, so he slept on the chair by Karen's bedside. The Anbu hadn't given him a place where he could sleep, and since he couldn't go back to the Uchiha district there was nowhere else to go. Haku had no money on him and had solely relied on Sasuke's wealth for financial support since he was a newcomer in the village. Haku had left his possessions and what little money he did have within the Uchiha compound. He had planned to make an earning as a Junin after the tests decided that his skills qualified for that position, but now he was at a loss. Haku couldn't really think of anything else to do. Even after the Chunin exams ended, the Hokage's authority superseded Sasuke's, so there could be nothing done for him until Uzumaki Karen woke up. He wasn't sure why he was even allowed to stay by her bedside if he was deemed a threat. Haku's intuition told him that the Hokage knew something about Karen's condition that he was keeping a secret. A few clansmen from the Uzumaki would come by once or twice a day to check up on her condition under orders from the clan head, but no one seemed to make a visit for personal reasons. He was just thankful that they opted not to bother with him even if it was because he was suspected of being a spy for Orochimaru. Haku knew that they did not desire potential tools with bad reputations. Haku could feel killing intent periodically from some of his Anbu watchers. One Konoha Junin was dead and another incapacitated under mysterious circumstances, after all. He attempted to ignore it as best as possible, but over the days it began to agitate him. He sorely hoped Karen would awake soon. If she died from what troubled her body, then the Anbu would surely persecute him on groundless implications that would seem all too reasonable to the public. Well, I must say that I am quite pleased with these turn of events, said Renmara in satisfaction. He used his forearms to release two short-boned swords. By defeating you, my clan shall prove that not only is my shinobi education on par with the academy's, but that it is superior because I will have defeated the Rookie of the Year. Glad to see that your clan thinks so highly of me, quipped Sasuke, giving Renmara the classic Uchiha smirk. I'll be sure to give you a good smackdown for what you did to my teammate. Do not begrudge me for taking an opportunity that presented itself, replied Renmara with just as much vigor. You should be proud of her. I am not ashamed to admit that I was careless at first and was nearly defeated due to a mistake. Of course, in the end, I prevailed as expected. Which is more than can be said about you. The Rookie of the Year beaten and unconscious within the first day, it's rather shameful. Should we expect low-quality standards from all of those of the Konoha Academy? You are, after all, the representation of their finest. We ran into some trouble, admitted Sasuke, knowing that nobody would actually believe they fought an S-rank nuke nin and lived. Sasuke had to keep it a secret for security purposes regardless. But we made it to the finals. That's the beginning and the end of it. Time to fight. I'd like to see you keep stroking your own ego after I've beaten you. Renmara lunged toward Sasuke. He held his right bone poised to strike as he attempted to stab Sasuke in the face. Sasuke closed his eyes, bent backwards to avoid the incoming stab, and brought his left foot upward to kick Renmara in the groin harshly. Renmara bit back a scream and backpedaled to avoid being hit while exposed. Sasuke moved back to an upright position to reveal his fully developed Sharingan. Renmara gaped in abject shock. He had been confident that he could defeat the Uchiha prodigy easily because the mission reports indicated that Uchiha Sasuke hadn't fully developed his Sharingan. Somehow, in less than a week and miraculously while he was unconscious, he had gained a fully developed dojutsu. Uzumaki Kushina's lips thinned as she gazed upon this new development. Yakumo scrunched her face in mild annoyance, and Idate merely looked surprised like the other spectators. Sakura and Naruto exchanged smirks upon seeing the surprised reactions of the others. My youthful rival, boasted Maida Guy, to think that you had a training regime to accelerate your students' prowess to this level. Clearly, you are a worthy adversary. Don't look at me, replied Kakashi mildly. Sasuke attained that level of mastery himself. It wasn't my training that did it. Asuma and Kurenai looked in his direction in disbelief. They didn't buy it. The evidence just didn't match that explanation. Sasuke had only begun training as a genin a short while ago. I hope you haven't been neglecting your other students in favor of your best one, said Kurenai bluntly with an edge in her voice. She gave Kakashi a scowl. That sort of behavior could get you reprimanded once it's reported. Kakashi held down the irritation he felt at that comment. It was embarrassing to have your teaching methods questioned among both your peers and students. He felt a firm response was necessary toward this misplaced accusation. The only student of mine that I've arguably given special training to is Naruto, said Kakashi curtly, and that was because he already mastered rudimentary training sometime before becoming a genin. Idate openly snorted at that as Yakumo tried to stop her eyes from rolling. What fool would believe that? Considering the reprobate's performance record, thought Idate amused, it's clear the so-called special training entailed the rudimentary exercises. This Junin is full of it. The Academy's public performance record speaks for itself. Renmara tried a flurry of thrust attacks to turn Sasuke into a human pincushion. Sasuke easily sidestepped, backed away, and bent away from these strikes. He grabbed Renmara's left wrist before using his right elbow to slam onto the middle of the arm. Renmara cried out in pain. Sasuke backed his right fist and punched Renmara square in the face with all the physical force that he could muster. Sasuke had let go of Renmara's wrist just as he connected the punch. He sent Renmara careening to the floor. The Uzumaki's body continued to roll wildly on the ground before finally stopping the momentum near the stadium wall. That was for what you did to Sakura, snarled Sasuke, you pathetic bastard. Yeah, get him Sasuke, roared Ino heartily. She was practically jumping up and down on the spectator area. Fuck that Ino, admonished Asuma, feeling embarrassed that his pupil was about to use such language under the present company of his fellow peers and his father. You must act like a respectable shinobi in this formal inter-village spectacle. Asuma was usually laid back, but he did not want to be blamed for his students' foul use of language. He would never hear the end of it from his old man. Ino couldn't be seen cursing amidst the foreigners of Sand and Sound, the Uzumaki clan leader who was also a close advisor of the Fire Daimyo, and in the presence of the Hokage himself. It just wouldn't be tolerated. Ino turned around and gazed up at her teacher before turning back around quickly to cup her hands in front of her face. She didn't care who she was embarrassing. The image of Sakura on the ground with harsh cuts in a pool of her own blood superseded any need for public courtesy in Ino's mind. Beat the living shit out of him, Sasuke-kun, shouted Ino enthusiastically. Give him hell. The stupid fucker deserves it. Ino, that's enough, snarled Asuma. He was losing his patience. I will not tolerate you saying this. You don't have to worry, Ino, said Sasuke smirking. It would be my pleasure to beat this miserable as to a pulp. Sakura blushed at the extroverted enthusiasm of both her teammate and best friend wanting vengeance for her sake. She felt a swell of happiness spread through her despite the increased embarrassment of both of their antics. Naruto was trying to hide his snickering as he enjoyed watching Sasuke give the beat down on the punk. Hinata rolled her eyes at the display of stupidity that Yamanaka was showing. Idate watched impassively and Yakumo glared at the idiocy shown by the blonde weakling. That is a deplorably unbecoming statement from the scion of the Uchiha clan, spoke Uzumaki Kushina for the first time. She caught the attention of the other audience members. You should be aware of your standing amongst peers and superiors, Uchiha-san. Partaking in such unruly discourse demonstrates your childishness. Please refrain from this petulant behavior in the presence of the foreign shinobi, the Hokage, and I. Consider what your parents would think of such a demeanor. Sasuke's eyes narrowed as he gazed directly at Uzumaki Kushina. That insult vexed Sasuke. It was entirely underhanded to mention the expectations of his dead parents as a way to persuade Sasuke to conform to her demands. Renmara came running toward him at full speed. Sasuke allowed Renmara to twirl in a slashing motion before maneuvering to Renmara's right side and tripping his footing. Renmara's eyes bulged at having what should have been an effective fighting strategy so easily exploited. The Sharingan was proving to be a formidable challenge. Sasuke cupped his hands together as he moved his shoulders to the right and then slammed his elbow on the back of Renmara's exposed neck. Renmara screeched in pain as he was sent flying face first to the wall at the other end of the stadium. There was a short boom sound as a giant dust cloud obscured Renmara from view. Sasuke's Sharingan simply rendered Renmara's fighting style obsolete. Sasuke was just as fast as Renmara and his Sharingan instinctively pointed out the weaknesses that Sasuke could exploit at exactly the right moment. Nobody had expected Sasuke to gain the full powers of the Sharingan so early in his shinobi career. For all the Uzumaki clan's grooming, they couldn't have prepared Renmara for this. Sasuke looked back up to where Kushina was. He would show her for using his deceased parents to badmouth him. You have no right to speak of my family, spat Sasuke snappishly. Kushina's porcelain features began to feature a faint scowl at Sasuke's tone. You really think that you have the right to judge me? How about I start judging you then? You're a terrible mother and human being. The entire crowd seemed to stiffen at Sasuke's words. Kushina outright glared at Sasuke as if daring him to say that again. Yakumo snarled at Sasuke as Idate merely gave him a contemptible gaze as if to express Sasuke's accusation were underneath him. Naruto groaned and rubbed his head as he felt a headache coming along. He really didn't want Sasuke to ruin his own reputation for his sake. He appreciated Sasuke backing up his side, but Naruto didn't want this to be made an issue. Kakashi didn't know if he should applaud or denounce it. On one hand, Sasuke was defending a teammate, and on the other hand he was vocally making an issue in a very self-righteous way. The rest of the spectators simply watched the drama unfold. Clearly, began Kushina darkly, you were too young to learn proper manners from your family. It is quite a shame that you've abandoned proper formal etiquette for this callow manner of speech. How the hell could you just abandon a 6-year-old child? Shouted back Sasuke angrily, family is supposed to be there for each other. They're not supposed to just abandon a child and leave him to live alone in the streets off government stipends. You people are fucking heartless. That is enough, Uchiha. Shouted Kushina, her beautiful features now held a tinge of red with anger. I shall not have the decisions I make about my clan ridiculed by your juvenile behavior. What could you possibly understand about the pertinent decisions that I make? You are to apologize for this at once or else I shall have you reprimanded. I will seek damages through the Konoha Council if you continue this contemptuous behavior any further. Renmara jumped high with his bone swords held in reverse as he dove at Sasuke. Sasuke grabbed his right arm when Renmara was close enough and hurled him over his shoulder. He punched Renmara squarely in the gut when Renmara was upside down and in front of him. He had already let go of Renmara's right arm to see Renmara helplessly fly toward the stadium wall that he had nearly hit the first time. Renmara slammed into the wall with a dust cloud forming around the area he had impacted. I, Uchiha Sasuke, hereby reject any form of cooperation and camaraderie with the Uzumaki clan and henceforth demand proper restitution for my teammate Uzumaki Naruto until such a time that I find the redress to be satisfactory, spoke Sasuke in a formal tone. The entire crowd stared in open shock. If such measures have not been met, then I shall regard your clan as an obstruction to the basic rights of all Konoha citizens. I shall see you as the enemy of the Uchiha clan. How dare you? Hollered Kushina loudly. You do not have the right to declare open hostility over the measure of treatment I deem sufficient within my own clan. Actually, I have plenty of right seeing as I was made the clan head as is my birthright, said Sasuke smirking. I judge by what I see and what I see disgusts me. You will regret this, Uchiha. Bit back Kushina, her anger was apparent to everyone in the stadium. Your delinquency will be shown in court and you shall apologize to me for such disrespectful and moronic provocations. Kushina proceeded to point a delicately manicured finger at Naruto. She kept her glare on Sasuke. All this for that worthless excuse for a shinobi. That boy is nothing but a failure in every regard. He has no bloodline, barely passed the shinobi academy, and is not only an embarrassment to the Uzumaki name but a wretched sin to its very core. That is completely out of line. Shouted Sasuke getting angrier. Don't you dare insult my friend within my presence. Friend. Screeched Kushina staring at Sasuke in disgust. The Hokage looked ready to step in. You call him a friend? That impurity is a shame. Do you not understand? He is a personal shame. I birthed that disgrace and had to endure for 6 years before I finally had enough. I washed my hands clean to help my family. I knew I was making the right choice too. That reprobate said he wanted to be Hokage. It was the same dream that the heathenish madman who killed the pious bloodline clans of Kirigakura had. It would have been the second coming of a demon. Enough. Bellowed the Hokage furiously. There is to be no more conversation for the remainder of this match from anybody. Anyone who breaks this decree shall be disqualified under my authority. Many of the genin appeared confused by Kushina's words but wisely obeyed the Hokage's orders. Kushina simply glared at Sasuke. Sasuke decided to just focus on his opponent so he wouldn't retort. Idate and Yakumo smirked upon seeing their clan head get the last word in. Asuma, Kurenai, and Guy gave dark looks toward Kushina's direction. Ino looked at Kushina in repulsion, having understood some of the words she used to describe her own son. Hinata appeared mildly annoyed and would occasionally sneak glares in Kushina's direction. Sakura and Kakashi looked over at Naruto in concern. Naruto simply looked down at the floor hatefully. I knew it, thought Naruto ruefully. I knew she didn't give a shit. So why do I always hope that she does? Why do I always put myself through it? I know what the result will be. Showing off a bloodline limit would just make her hate me more. Why couldn't she have just suffocated me when I was a baby? Why does it still hurt after all this time? Naruto's shoulders shook before he took a few deep breaths to suppress the tears that threatened to come out. He didn't want to embarrass himself in front of everyone here. That was the worst pain of all. Showing that the words got to him, why did he still care about their approval? Renmara charged with a flurry of slashes, but Sasuke dropped down on the floor and brought his left foot up to slam into Renmara's chin, sending him high in the air. Sasuke jumped high in the air after him and kneed him in the back. Renmara roared in pain as Sasuke flipped his body forward to get above Renmara to stomp harshly on his stomach. Sasuke finished the tactical combo by twirling to his right to kick Renmara in the face and sending him spiraling to the floor. Renmara got up from the floor growling in anger. He spat the blood from his bleeding mouth. He briefly closed his eyes to inhale and exhale to calm himself. He reopened his eyes and threw his bone swords at Sasuke. Sasuke responded by throwing 2 quick kunai at the bones, rendering them useless. Renmara took the chance to unleash the bone spikes throughout his body. "Unagi no Mai," yelled Renmara, taking the offensive once more. He pulled out 2 bone swords from his forearms again. Renmara was closing the distance quicker than usual. It seemed he was desperate. Sasuke quickly put forth a tiger seal to the surprise of Renmara. "Kaden. Ruka no Jutsu," said Sasuke before breathing some air. Sasuke exhaled the dragon fire technique straight toward Renmara. Renmara bent backwards at the very last moment to allow the fiery technique to pass over him and burn away a chunk of the far wall. Sasuke released the technique and jumped high into the air. Renmara leapt into the air toward him, ready to attack him with his defensive bone form. That way Sasuke couldn't counter without hurting himself, and he wouldn't have the time to concentrate on the chakra required for a jutsu. Sasuke threw shuriken at Renmara, which forced Renmara to use the Karamatsu no Mai spinning defense to deflect the shuriken away from him. Once he broke out of the spinning, Renmara was left unprepared for the dragon fire attack that blasted straight into him. Renmara wailed in agony as his body was set on fire and blown toward the statue of the far wall behind him, where it impacted and exploded in streams of smoke and fire. Renmara's body was still ablaze as it fell to the floor harshly. He rolled around on the floor for a few minutes to put the fire out. The fire eventually went out. His body finally stilled as he passed out from the pain of enduring a few third-degree burns on patches of his body. Participant Uzumaki Renmara is unable to battle. This match goes to Uchiha Sasuke. Called Hayate. While trying to maintain his coughing, would the medical team please come forward? The medical team rushed forward onto the battleground to carefully place Renmara on the stretcher. Sasuke walked back up to the spectator box, where he saw his team's congratulatory faces and Team Uzumaki's hateful glares. "Congratulations, Sasuke," said Sakura cheerfully. "I knew that he would be no match for you." "Way to kick his ass, Sasuke," said Ino, walking into view, glad to see some justice was done. "Justice?" spat Yakumo, listening in and walking over to them. "The Uchiha nearly killed Renmara. How is that justice? Nothing short of what that bastard deserved," countered Ino. She glared at Yakumo in disgust. "He tried to kill Sakura in the forest. That was completely legal," replied Yakumo, getting angrier at the audacity of the blonde before her. "Don't tell me you're so stupid that you forgot about the death waiver that all of us genin here signed." "Yakumo, enough. Stop participating in their raving stupidity," bellowed Kushina, appearing annoyed. "Get over here and do not say another word to that delinquent." Yakumo stayed for a bit to keep glaring at Ino before rushing back to her clan head's side. Ino glared right back even as Yakumo walked away. "I hope I get to beat her as," muttered Ino before directing her attention back toward Squad 7, "anyway. Good job showing those psychos who's boss, Sasuke." "You did great, Sasuke," added Naruto stiffly. Sasuke looked back at Naruto apologetically. Naruto didn't know what to say. "Listen, Naruto, I didn't mean for that display to happen," said Sasuke ruefully. "I shouldn't have put you in the middle like that. I can understand that you're mad. I just lost it. Considering how they treated you and what I feel family should be, I just lost it." "That's no excuse though. It's alright," said Naruto after thinking it over. "I can't say I wasn't entirely appreciative of you standing up for me. Although, there are better ways to do it." Sasuke chuckled at that. Kakashi smiled under his mask, seeing that the team spats were resolved easily without his interference. "You've trained your pupil well, Kakashi," said Kurenai, coming into view with Shino and Hinata. It appears to me that Uchiha-san was merely pointing out the truth, suggested Hinata, having heard their conversation. Peculiarly, Kiba hadn't joined the rest of Squad 8 in walking towards Squad 7. Naruto noticed that Kiba had a particularly hateful gaze toward his team. Sakura followed Naruto's gaze and felt unnerved by Kiba's visage. Hinata took note and turned around to give Kiba a death glare of her own. Kiba quickly looked the other way to view the Sand team. "The fool is looking at me," explained Hinata flatly. She turned back around to face them. "I made it evident that I didn't care or appreciate his idiotic gestures of affection after saving your team from nearly being killed. I wish to congratulate you, Uchiha-san. Your battle prowess clearly exceeds mine. I defeated that Uzumaki too, but not as easily as you." Sasuke nodded in thanks. The next match was announced on the electric board. Yamanaka Ino vs. Haruno Sakura. The two girls stared at each other in surprise before heading down to the battleground. Hayate raised his hand up and called for the match to begin. Sakura pulled her headband over her head in a traditional style and waited for Ino to attack. Ino, however, seemed distracted. They both waited for the other to make a move. Ino was torn. It shouldn't bother her, but after seeing Sakura in a bloody mess, she didn't feel good about fighting her friend. Fighting her meant potentially seeing that helpless and bleeding body again, except this time by Ino's direct actions. Ino had a hard time getting the image out of her mind. The memory was too fresh. Ino bit her lip in anger before exhaling and sighing aloud. She raised her hand up in the air. "I give up," said Ino decidedly. Sakura's eyebrows rose in surprise. Ino dropped her arm. "I'm sorry, Sakura, but I just can't bring myself to fight you. This isn't out of pity. After nearly seeing you die, I honestly just can't do it." Sakura looked indignant. Ino gave a small shrug in apology. Sakura shook her head before heading back up the spectator box. Ino followed along from a distance. Hayate had already called the match in Sakura's favor. Ino walked toward her own team and ignored Team 7. "Well, I guess you won't be able to blame me if I just give up now," said Shikamaru pleased, "otherwise, you're a hypo." "Shut it, Shikamaru," said Ino tiredly. She didn't look at him as she made it back to Team 10's side. "I'm not in the mood for your idiocy." Shikamaru scowled at Ino. Choji quietly tried to keep out of it like usual. The next match to be called was Tsuchi-kin vs. Nara Shikamaru. After Shikamaru's victory by using his family jutsu to slam Kin's head against the wall, the medics took her away and the next battle was called. The blonde Sand Shinobi defeated Tenten easily. The other Junin took note of the fact that Guy had failed to train Tenten in good taijutsu to deal with far-ranged attacks. The Hokage gave a stern gaze toward Guy after the battle. It didn't help that Hayate had to order Rock Lee to be stopped and threatened to disqualify him if he tried to attack the other competitors in such a wanton fashion again. Konoha wouldn't tolerate one of their own physically attacking foreigners of another nation over petty squabbles such as wanting to get even for the defeat of a comrade. After that, the face-painted Sand Shinobi and the wind-using Sound Shinobi were next to battle. After a few attempts to destroy Kankuro with his wind blasts, Zaku finally landed a blow that appeared to rip Kankuro to pieces. Zaku's overconfidence cost him as Kankuro's real puppet erupted from the ground and slammed Zaku into the coffin-like trap. Zaku screamed his last breath as the coffin-like prison killed him from within. Kankuro released the hold the puppet had to show everyone the gruesome pincushion-like death of the Sound Shinobi. The Sand team, the remaining Sound Shinobi, Team Uzumaki, and the adults in the room looked on impassively. The rest of the genin were either disturbed, closed their eyes, or looked away. Team 7 were only minimally affected, having seen dead bodies before. Hinata did not betray her emotions from the frigid visage she held. Ino appeared the most disturbed by these turn of events because it was a reminder of what nearly happened to Sakura. Shikamaru and Choji were more affected by this because it was far more gruesome than what they had observed of Sakura's dire straits back in the Forest of Death. The medics took the corpse away. Kankuro made his way back to his siblings. The next match was called Uzumaki vs. Uzumaki, Tekken. Yukumo smirked as she walked down the stairs toward the battleground. She was pleased with being able to fight the failure of the Uzumaki clan. She would not only be able to showcase the great talents of the Uzumaki clan but kill the black sheep of the clan too. It was a literal version of killing two birds with one stone. Naruto kept his demeanor reserved. After nearly embarrassing himself earlier, he desired to keep his emotions in check. He didn't want to reveal that his mother's words had an impact on him. He put his focus on the opponent in front of him. He scowled as he noticed her haughty smirk. Naruto quietly breathed in and out to try and abate his anger. It has getting harder to keep in check with his so-called family insulting or attempting to kill him at every instance. Naruto was struggling with his own emotions on the situation. He was both deeply depressed over his mother's words and infuriated by them. It wasn't a stretch of the imagination to say that Naruto had thought of torturing his family. But that's wrong, thought Naruto, trying to rein in his overflowing emotions. I can't think like that. I won't prove that I'm the demon that they accuse me of being. I'm not like Yagiri Yagura. I'll ignore them. It's the right action to take and it proves that I'm the stronger person. This match is like a gift, said Yakumo sneering. Not only will I prove myself to be a capable chunin to the examiners, I'll be able to uphold the dignity of the clan. The Uchiha defeated Rinmara, but nobody expected the Uchiha to have mastered his bloodline limits so early. It isn't much of a shame to have lost to the last of a noble bloodline. You, however, have no chance against me. Do yourself a favor and humbly admit defeat. Be grateful I'm being lenient because Idate-kun would not be. The onlookers stayed quiet and simply watched for the match. After the Hokage's disapproving decree in Sasuke and Rinmara's match and the bloody mess from the match between Kankuro and Zaku, none of the genin could muster enough curiosity or nerve to speak on the match yet. The Junin didn't have to enforce discipline or drag themselves into conversation for that reason. Are you going to talk or are you going to fight? Said Naruto resolutely. I don't care about what you think. Naruto proceeded to run toward Yakumo at an accelerated pace, pulled his fist back, and punched her in the face. Naruto reared back his hand in pain. Yakumo took advantage of Naruto's surprise by bending her knees, moving her left leg in a stomping motion in front of her, and delivering a painful blow to Naruto's sternum with a powerful left-hand strike. He looked toward Yakumo in confusion as he was sent flying backward and landed harshly on the dusty floor on the other end of the battleground. Naruto slowly got up as he gingerly rubbed the area that was now throbbing in pain. He threw two quick shuriken at Yakumo. The shuriken struck Yakumo in the face only to have their motion stopped after bouncing off her skin. The genjutsu on the shuriken wore off to reveal explosive seals. Yakumo's eyes widened in momentary surprise before the seals exploded. Once the dust was settled, Yakumo was revealed to be completely unharmed. An arrogant smirk was plastered on her visage. Kotan, murmured Naruto, the fact she was unharmed confirmed that she had the steel bloodline. My taijutsu offense is useless. The steel bloodline was one of the best abilities for high-powered taijutsu combat. Earth ninjutsu was mostly useless against the bloodline because the defense of a steel body user was far greater than the attack power of shinobi who incorporated earth ninjutsu into their taijutsu. The very skin of a steel body user changed to the composition of black steel. Black steel was one of the toughest metals to exist in the shinobi world. Some touted that the steel bloodline was the ultimate shield. It protected the user from many damaging techniques and made hand-to-hand combat virtually useless. If it had been a Hyuga who was facing a steel bloodline user, then in most cases the Hyuga would likely lose because traditional gentle fist was rendered obsolete against black steel skin. Naruto briefly mused over using the Rinnegan's gravity techniques to swiftly defeat Yakumo. He would be able to blast Yakumo at far distances and use her own strength against her with the gravity jutsus. Naruto decided against it. He had promised himself to only use it in emergency situations, and if he beat Yakumo without using his bloodline, then he could use it as a trump card for the actual Chunin exams tournament. I tried to be nice, said Yakumo. She glared at Naruto in disdain. None of your equipment will work against me. This match was over the moment it was announced. Yakumo ran toward Naruto at a rapid pace. Her intent was to kill Naruto by transforming her right arm into its black steel form and punching through his stomach. He would bleed out, eventually succumb to death, and Yakumo would legally get away with the murder because of the inter-village laws. She had explicitly made sure not to shout out her intentions of murdering Naruto so that the Uzumaki clan didn't run into bureaucratic trouble for the purposeful murder of another participant. Once Yakumo was close enough, Naruto bent backwards as he breathed inward before pushing his body back up and exhaling the Kaden, Ruka no Jutsu technique. It didn't go unnoticed that he had used this jutsu without any hand seals. Yakumo was caught off guard as the dragon fire jutsu blazed through her dead-on. Her body was pushed in the opposite direction before the fire fully receded to reveal Yakumo had instinctively protected herself by activating her bloodline. Her skin had fully changed to a dark bluish color. An enraged visage was marring her features. The spectators could see that some of her kimono had been charred. Yakumo jumped high into the air toward Naruto. Her vengeful appearance said it all. She aimed to kill him. Yakumo brought her right hand back as she slammed it toward where Naruto was. Yakumo's attack created a small crater when she finally landed. She rose up from the floor and looked around for her prey. She used her hereditary Uzumaki chakra sensing ability but shockingly couldn't find a trace of him. "Examiner," spoke Yakumo softly, she relaxed her posture. "My opponent has cowardly fled from this fight. Submit this match in my favor. It's against the rules to leave the Chunin Tower during the examination period." Hayate hesitated as he tried to futilely search for Naruto's chakra. The Hokage was watching and wanted to make sure that he was being fair to Naruto. Hayate was aware the Uzumaki sensing ability was greater than the usual shinobi's. Hayate almost looked pleadingly up to the Hokage before straightening his posture. He needed to be the one to make the decisions in this exam. After a few minutes of agitation, Hayate finally decided to call it in since Naruto clearly wasn't in the area. The spectators had mixed reactions. Team 7 seemed relaxed and Sasuke seemed to almost be smiling. Kurenai actually shared in Team 7's calmness. Shikamaru, Choji, Shino, Hinata, and Team Guy looked on impassively. Ino seemed to be cursing under her breath wondering why Naruto wasn't showing up. Asuma gazed sternly at Kakashi wondering how poor of a teacher the man was. Kiba hollered about starting the next match because the one in the battleground was clearly over. The Sound Shinobi, Team Uzumaki, and the older siblings of the Sand team silently agreed with the harping mutt. The Jinchuriki of the Sand kept his eyes on the battleground. Participe. Hayate's statement was cut off when a giant fireball smashed the back of Yakumo and sent her skidding forward before she fell face first onto the floor. The attention of the audience was instantly drawn back into the fight. All complaints vanished. "I never left," stated Naruto matter-of-factly. He appeared a few distances behind her. "I just know how to evade your sensing ability with my movements. It's not difficult to understand the flaws of an ability that I have too. I knew giving you a false sense of security would work." Yakumo got up as she spit dirt out of her mouth and wiped the remaining dirt off her lips. She turned around letting out an angry growl. Yakumo ran forward before jumping into the air. Yakumo gave a fierce twirling kick to try and strike at Naruto's midsection. Naruto had agilely ducked out of the way before the trajectory of the kick could strike him. Yakumo followed up with a downward haymaker only to make a small fist-like crater on the floor. Naruto was now standing a few feet away from her. The attack had missed completely. Naruto had back-flipped out of harm's way before the strike could connect. "Damn you," snarled Yakumo enraged. She couldn't even lay a finger on him. "You can't possibly be that fast. This must be some sort of trick. I'm as fast as Renmara." Naruto didn't answer her. It would be stupid to reveal your technique to your opponent, especially when it was working out so well. The simple fact was Naruto's speed was one of the fastest amongst the genin. Naruto had mastered the Shunshin no Jutsu and incorporated the technique with his taijutsu. It gave him a considerable edge against the competition since very few could incorporate the Shunshin no Jutsu in this manner. Naruto mastering the technique to the point of not needing any hand seals meant people wouldn't expect to fight against such a technique. The general consensus was the Shunshin took high levels of concentration to use, and even previous Shunshin taijutsu masters required to use the hand seal in the beginning of the fight to activate the jutsu. Naruto had rewritten the very concept of the Shunshin taijutsu by being able to freely activate and deactivate the jutsu without the hand seal. Yakumo began using earth techniques as a counter-offensive. "I will not be humiliated by this failure." Yakumo was enraged by how the match was going. "I will make it to the tournament phase of the exams. I will make all of my clan's hard work and my talent known." Doden. Shuriken. screeched Yakumo angrily. She went through 3 precise hand seals before stomping her right foot on the floor. 3 sharp earth-made shuriken flew from the ground toward Naruto's direction. A fast whizzing could be heard, but the projectiles seemed to go through Naruto and slammed into the far wall behind him. The afterimage of Naruto disappeared completely. Brilliant, said Kurenai in admiration. I have to apologize for earlier, Kakashi. It seems you have taught him well. Mixing Shunshin no Jutsu with Bunshin no Jutsu is a taijutsu technique. To think such 2 ordinary jutsu could be so effective. I don't deserve much credit, said Kakashi shrugging. Naruto came up with this on his own. I just helped him with learning Shunshin no Jutsu by giving him the general guidelines. Kurenai nodded in respect before looking back at the match with the rest of the spectators. The audience's eyes were glued to the match now. Kushina was seething in thinly veiled anger. How could Yakumo be losing to that refuse? Idate looked on in disdain. Ino cheered on Naruto loudly as Asuma had trouble keeping her quiet. Yakumo repeatedly attempted to hit Naruto with the Earth Shuriken technique but only struck through afterimages. Yakumo attempted to mold the chakra to gain better precision, but Naruto's ability to simply sidestep proved this tactic to be useless. The Bunshin clones appeared more numerously, which made it more difficult for Yakumo to blow through them. A heavy gale surged forth as Yakumo was forced to put her arms in an X shape to guard her body. She began to skid backwards due to the force of the wind. Suddenly, fire erupted through the air as Yakumo roared in pain from a blazing fire scorching through her. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. Thought Naruto, expelling more of the fiery jutsu. Once he released the jutsu, watching another fireball headed in Yakumo's direction, Naruto made a punch motion in the air in the direction of the jutsu to add another technique to the grand fireball. Fuden. Daitapa. The wave of air grew stronger and turned the giant fireball into another fiery eruption that burned its way through Yakumo's ultimate shield defense. Yakumo could no longer hold the defensive stance as her body spasmed in agony from the volcanic strikes. Once the third fiery eruption came, Yakumo was blown backwards onto the floor where she began twitching, spasming, and rolling on the ground in agony. The spectators watched in appraising awe and horror as Yakumo's screams deafened the area. Perhaps you should give up, stated Naruto austerely. If you don't have an effective way to prevent my attacks from doing harm, then you will die. Shish, shut up. I don't need your pity. Snarled Yakumo, painfully rising up from the floor. I'll beat the living shit out of you. Just you. Why can't she just shut the hell up? Thought Naruto irritably. His frustrations were beginning to seep out. Why is it that no matter what I do, no matter what it is, there is always a put down? I don't want to hear any more of this. I don't want to snap. I refuse to act like a monster. Naruto was getting pissed off. He was absolutely fed up with the arrogance and condescending bullshit coming from the Uzumaki clan. He didn't want to hear any more. He was trying his best to honestly keep his hatred in check, but the asinine comments kept pushing him further and further to the exploding point. He just wanted to shut Yakumo up and try to end the match without any more of her blathering. Naruto pushed her back on the floor by punching the air and churning his chakra to create another Sealess Great Breakthrough technique. He inhaled fresh air before exhaling the Grand Fireball Jutsu to scorch through Yakumo. Yakumo screamed from the top of her lungs yet again. Naruto added an extra amount of fire power to the Fireball Jutsu out of frustration. Ino and Choji began feeling uncomfortable with what Naruto was doing. Kushina simply glared at Yakumo for what seemed to be a slap to the Uzumaki clan. Apart from Squad 7, Hinata, and the Hokage, the rest of the spectators believed Naruto was not holding anything back against his opponent. It was clear the general consensus for the match had been wrong. What was originally thought of as a bad matchup for Naruto was proven to be a bad matchup for his opponent. Yakumo wouldn't last much longer if Naruto kept pressing his attacks. I refuse, bit out Yakumo. She seethed from the excruciating pain once the fire began receding, to give up. I won't rest until I win. Yakumo jumped to her feet once the fire had subsided. She went through hand seals swiftly as possible. Doden. Doryuden, shouted Yakumo desperately. She stomped her foot on the ground once the rapid seals were done. Try taking on a signature jutsu of the Hokage. The Junin spectators looked impressed by her mastery of such a jutsu and the genin looked excited. An earth dragon head came up from the ground and opened its maw. The dragon's mouth began spewing large mudballs at a swift and successive rate. They were traveling at a pace faster than Naruto's Shunshin speed. Naruto jumped to the side to avoid the first mudball. He used the grand fireball technique to blow through the second mudball only to have large chunks of hardened shrapnel made of dirt explode in all directions. Naruto backflipped away to avoid them and then swerved out of the way to avoid the third mudball with a quick roll in the air to the left. Naruto used Shunshin to accelerate his jump high into the air to avoid the fourth mudball. Fuden. Shinkaha summoned Naruto desperately. It was getting increasingly difficult to avoid the Velocious mudballs. Naruto moved his right hand to his left waist before slashing in a 45-degree angle. The invisible wind blade technique cut deeply through the fifth mudball. The mudball was split into 5 different pieces and blown down to the floor harshly. They hit the ground with harsh thuds. The sixth mudball whizzed toward Naruto unheeded. Naruto leaned his head back as he breathed in before breathing out a larger than usual grand fireball jutsu toward the last mudball. The mudball exploded in harsh fiery shards painfully struck Naruto while bouncing harmlessly off Yakumo's ultimate shield. Got you, hollered Yakumo happily. She added a few hand seals to the hand seal she had kept during the mudball assault and stomped her foot on the floor to activate the earth jutsu, Doden, Dosekiryu. The earth made a tremor for a few seconds before the earth dragon head sprouted from the ground to fly toward Naruto as a fully formed earth dragon jutsu. Naruto drowned down his panic to focus on an offensive. Naruto leaned his head back and blew out the dragonfire jutsu in a hasty attempt to stop the attack. The fiery dragon collided head first with the earth dragon. A colossal explosion overtook the arena as a sickly black dust cloud overtook the space the explosion occurred. Sharp fiery pieces of earth shards blew in all directions as even the spectators ducked to avoid them. Hayate was forced to endure as he guarded against them. Once the sickly black cloud dissipated, everyone could see Naruto unconscious on the floor. His close proximity to the explosion had knocked him out cold. Yakumo quickly took advantage and ran in his direction. She leapt in the air as she stretched her right arm back. She punched straight through Naruto's chest cavity and created a gaping hole through his body and a dent on the floor. Most of the spectators were horrified by the grotesque deed. Kushina and Idate smiled in relief and pride respectively. Squad 7 looked pensive. Another Naruto broke through the floor behind Yakumo, surprising most of the spectators. Sasuke and Sakura shared smiles. Naruto was about to use a jutsu when Yakumo turned her body to the side and cut through Naruto's heart with a precise spear jab with her black steel fingers. The second Naruto stared at her in stunned shock as he began choking on his own blood. I predicted that you would try something underhanded like this, said Yakumo, sniggering in absolute satisfaction. She smiled wide as Naruto's coughing fit caused some of his blood to fall on her cheeks. She twisted her hands slightly just to hear him scream. Let me just say that you wouldn't have stood a chance against Idate-kun. He's on a whole different league altogether. Sasuke and Sakura watched in dazed horror. It hadn't occurred to Sasuke to activate his Sharingan because he felt distressed. Kiba, Ino, and Choji looked disgusted as they watched Naruto cough up more blood. Lee and Tenten couldn't help but look away despite their familiarity with such shinobi actions. It was made more painful because both of the participants were from Konoha. Neji stared impassively. Guy, Asuma, and Kurenai couldn't help but gaze at Kakashi in remorse. Idate had a smirk of delight and Kushina had a small smile on her face as her shoulders sagged in relief. Hinata had activated her Byakugan briefly before staring impassively. The blood that had fallen on Yakumo's cheeks suddenly started shining brightly. Yakumo's face scrunched up in confusion before her eyes widened in horrified realization. The Naruto below her and the Naruto above her both began shining brightly. A third Naruto sprouted from the ground behind her and hugged her from the back. The third Naruto shined brightly too. No, 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 chanted Yakumo, shaking her head in denial. It was too late to try to avoid what was to come. No. The Bunshin Daibakua Jutsu activated. The 3 Naruto clones detonated as a gigantic explosion encompassed the battleground. A dark dust cloud skewed the field of view for a few minutes. Once it was settled, Yakumo was knocked completely unconscious with burn marks around her body. She was back in her normal human form since the dark steel bloodline deactivated upon her losing consciousness. Naruto stared tiredly at the defeated girl. He had used over half his reserves and he was aware that he had made her push her chakra coils to the limit. It obviously hadn't been easy for a genin to use 2 Junin-level dragon jutsus in order to defeat him. After the minutes ticked by, Hayate raised his hand in the air to announce his decision. Participant Uzumaki Yakumo is unable to battle, said Hayate tiredly. He had been annoyed with having to avoid all the shrapnel and explosions. Participant Uzumaki Naruto wins. Kushina looked livid. Idate snarled in revulsion as he glared disdainfully at Yakumo. Sasuke, Sakura, Ino, and even Kurenai cheered. Kakashi nodded in approval. The rest began to either openly discuss or mule over the match silently. Naruto shunshined to where his team was while the medics arrived with a stretcher for Yakumo to take her to the infirmary. Naruto, I'm impressed, said Ino enthusiastically as she walked into view. How did you get so good? Practice, said Naruto simply. Sasuke, Sakura, and I just kept a tight training schedule since all three of us hoped Kakashi-sensei would allow us into the exams. We didn't want to enter unprepared. Ino stared ahead stupidly as she realized her own foolishness for having entered the exam without her team properly training for the excursion. She realized how lucky she was to be alive and have Shikamaru's brilliant mind to aid in the strategic thinking. The problem was her team had plenty of brain but no brawn to back it up. She broke out of her reverie and tried to smile. Well, congratulations on your victory, Naruto, said Ino brightly. They exchanged smiles before Ino walked back over to her team in discomfort over Naruto's words. Kiba seemed to be glaring in Naruto's direction in either hatred or jealousy. Naruto honestly couldn't tell which one it was and he didn't care either. Kiba still stood by his lonesome away from the rest of his team. Congratulations, Naruto-san, spoke Hinata cordially. Naruto's focus was now on her as she came into view. Your team seems to be earning the eyes of many here. Keep it up and you may gain the attention of a noble clan. You're giving me too much credit, chuckled Naruto shaking his head. People will see my public test scores from the academy and judge me on that. I'm known as the dead last of the Shinobi Academy and that title has lasted a lifetime in some cases. I believe you put far too much stock in the prior prejudices of people, said Hinata. She smirked at him whilst eyeing him greedily. A surprising upset will surely cause people to take interest in you. There are foreign influences determining which nation and specifically which clans will gain the most lucrative contracts. And as we both know, you're an eyeful of surprises. Naruto's eyes widened in surprise and he froze in muted shock because of her words. He readily understood what the deliberate meaning was. Hinata decided to move away but not before a few of her slender fingers briefly brushed the back of Naruto's right hand. The message was abundantly clear to Naruto. The Hyuga heiress wouldn't have risked that public display of affection if she had not known his secret. She was marking her clan's territory. Hyuga Hinata had publicly set her sights on Uzumaki Naruto. Unbeknownst to either of the two, Kurenai had noticed the brief display. She had decided not to voice her approval of Naruto's performance in his match. A small smile tugged at her lips. The Genjutsu mistress would assist the Hyuga heiress in acquiring what she desired. Congratulations, Naruto, said Sakura cheerily. She provided a much-needed distraction for him. You showed the Uzumaki what's what. Glad those bastards were taken down a peg. I knew you could do it, said Sasuke proudly. He was smiling too. He clapped Naruto on the shoulder. Now our whole team is in the finals. Naruto grinned at the praise from his teammates. His chest swelled with happiness. It eased his mind from dwelling on Hinata's revelation and the Uzumaki clan's hatred. All three of them certainly needed a breather from the hectic week they had endured. Naruto strained to keep his own feelings and actions in check. The praise was certainly helping to alleviate some of what was burdening his mind. Kakashi clapped Naruto on his other shoulder to show he was proud of his student. He decided not to admonish Sakura for cursing considering the circumstances behind her fight with the Uzumaki team in the Forest of Death. He had not taken kindly to learning from Naruto about Sakura fighting for her life against two teams who were out to specifically kill both of his male students. He couldn't do anything about it because what transpired within the Forest of Death had been legal by normal standards. Kakashi wouldn't be able to prove there was undue prejudice against either member of his squad from the Sound team or the Uzumaki team. Moreover, Konohagakure no Sato was on high alert for Orochimaru, and the village's security took precedent over a more open-ended legal argument about the Chunin exams. Even though Orochimaru's initial target appeared to be Sasuke and Naruto, this had quickly diverted to wanton destruction within the Forest of Death. Orochimaru's objectives were no longer the paramount issue. Security was on high alert to neutralize the Snake Sannin at all costs. Very few were concerned with the original targets because the power of the chakra blast that destroyed 1/8 of the forest had killed 4 genin teams. Kakashi had told the Hokage about the Kyuubi within Naruto being the root cause of that particular attack. No one knew that the attack Kyuubi had caused was the reason for the deaths. The Hokage and Kakashi were secretly conspiring to make sure nobody ever knew. The reports were modified to assure that the destruction would be pinned on Orochimaru. The deaths of the genin squads had been legal regardless, but they didn't want to public knowing of the Kyuubi's influence on Naruto. As such, the current predicament regarding Orochimaru was a mixed blessing for Kakashi. The next match was called forth on the electronic board. Hyuga Hinata vs Hyuga Neji. Many shared visages of surprise. Shino gave a nod of good luck and Kurenai gave Hinata a reassuring smile. The spectators appeared curious about the matchup. It was a well-known fact that Hyuga Neji was proclaimed as a Hyuga genius by the teachers at the academy and had many successful C-rank missions under the tutelage of Maida Guy. Many foreigners had placed safe bets on Hyuga Neji being Konoha's prominent star in the Chunin finals. The boy's record of learning Hyuga techniques at an advanced rate was stunning. It was rumored that he had already learned the 8 trigram 64 palms and the Hakusho Kaden technique despite having no tutors from the main branch. Hyuga Hinata was not as well known to foreigners. Back during her earlier years, the girl had a reputation for being sweet and kind-hearted. However, over the years, she grew to accept the Hyuga customs and the main branch spoke proudly of Hinata as a shining example of what proper discipline under Hyuga tutelage could accomplish. What caused this change in behavior wasn't known to the public. It was rumored that her father, Hyuga Hiyashi, and her then Chunin bodyguard, Yuhi Kurenai, made an anonymous compromise that impacted Hinata's early development. Hinata had slowly grown into the expectations of the cold and confident heiress that her family desired her to be. Many civilian and shinobi modernists decried this was a travesty and that archaic cultural norms had brainwashed a bright young girl. Hinata's academic performance was not as spectacular as Hyuga Neji's. She had come in second place to Uchiha Sasuke in the academy and Haruno Sakura had outperformed her weapons scores. Neither Hyuga Hiyashi nor Yuhi Kurenai had heeded these academic facts and the main branch continued to promote Hinata as a stellar shinobi. The rumors and academic performance records led people to believe that while Hyuga Hinata was a very good kunoichi in her own right, she was not a Hyuga genius like Hyuga Neji. The two Hyuga clan members regarded each other on the battleground. Both exhibited a cold disposition towards each other. Team Uzumaki paid close attention to the matchup. Learning as much about the Hyuga competition could be crucial. Hyuga Neji was known as one of the strongest genin in Konoha due to the rumors behind him. Hyuga Hinata was not to be taken lightly either. She had defeated Renmara in an even match within the Forest of Death. The Uzumaki were aware that her skills appeared to be on par with Hyuga Neji. The rest of the spectators were curious. Many had heard tales of the power of the gentle fist technique, but few had ever seen the display with their own eyes. Everyone knew about the Hyuga style, the Hyuga bloodline, and Hyuga history. The Konoha citizens weren't ignorant of the pertinent history involving their own home village and one of the most prominent clans to have ever existed within Konoha. Hinata-sama, began Neji coldly. He activated his Byakugan. I suggest you forfeit before you foolishly injure yourself. I'm sure everyone here knows who the stronger one of us is. Excuse me, said Hinata in a clipped tone, her eyes darkened. Watch how you speak to a member of the main branch in public. People's roles in society are decided by the judgment of others, said Neji, ignoring Hinata's annoyed rebuttal. How we are perceived by others determines how we function in society. That is how people are fated to live. That is the way God chose to make our world. We all follow the rules that God governs for us. You, Hinata-sama, may act like a proud member of the Hyuga clan, but that is all it is, an act. We both know the truth. While the Hyuga clan promotes you as a prime example of proper guidance, you still refuse to ever fight back against your own sister. You managed to convince Hiyashi-sama to reject many prestigious suitors who the Hyuga council felt were more than satisfactory to the clan's qualifications of what constituted a proper husband, and you're routinely allowed to leave the clan compound with only your Junin-sensei as supervisor. Hinata's eyes flashed a chakra pulse as her Byakugan activated in undisguised anger. This was not how a cadet family member spoke to a member of the main branch. You are clearly shying away from the Hyuga clan's honor. The Lord prescribed those duties to the Hyuga and decreed the roles of not just the main and cadet branch of the Hyuga, but the will of fire further elaborated on how all people are to live their lives. I have lived my life as mandated by the Lord. You have lived your life by making a public spectacle of yourself as a true follower of the clan, whereas in truth you have only grown bolder and more frivolous. Well, Neji, spoke Hinata with a cool smirk on her face, if what you say is the truth, then you ought to forfeit, not I. After all, fate or God determines our lives despite everything else. By defying me, no matter under these conditions, you are defying your role in society. To fight against me is to face against your own fatalistic views on life. In actuality, no matter how weak I am and how strong you are, I should win because fate has ordained my predestined position as a main branch member, and that alone should make me mightier than you. As for my sister, you have no right to speak of my actions regarding my own sister, so I suggest you hold your tongue. That is not what I meant, growled Neji in indignation. I did not mean, you're not correct. Prove me wrong, said Hinata smoothly. There was laughter in her eyes as she got into the Hyuga fighting stance. Hinata had openly ridiculed and rightly pointed out the problems with Neji's philosophy on life. Neji got into battle stance in anger. He intended to show Hinata that he was right through might. He stubbornly refused to acknowledge the brokenness of such thinking. Neji ran toward Hinata, intending to capitalize through swift blows to her tenketsu. Hinata threw a scroll that unfurled itself while moving in Neji's direction. Neji slowed down in confusion and backpedaled upon seeing Hinata stealthily throw a kunai in his direction as well. Neji thanked the Lord that he had, because the kunai tore some of the scroll and unleashed a humongous current of water that flooded the battleground. The onlookers stared in surprise by the unexpected turn of events. Hayate was the first to come up from the water, Hinata came up soon afterwards, and Neji came up last. Hayate coughed out water that unexpectedly inhabited his throat, Hinata smirked in satisfaction, and Neji appeared livid. The giant pool of water overtook slightly more than half the battleground in its depth. All three stood on the water with no problems. Neji struck toward Hinata again. He intended to finish the match quickly. He still hadn't perfected fighting on top of the water skillfully enough yet. He only had an intermediate level of balancing out fighting on top of water. The main branch was taught how to handle water walking and tree climbing at a very early age to help improve their gentle fist control. The cadet branch could only watch in observation by copying what they saw. It was assumed any cadet branch who joined the military ranks would just learn from their Junin instructor regardless. Therefore, Hinata was far better suited in this terrain. Neji hadn't mastered proper control of the water walking exercise despite his tutelage under Maeda Gai. Hinata bent backwards to avoid Neji's first strike before coming back up and exchanging blows with him. They both expertly deflected each other's hands. The spectators watched in astonishment as the two seemed evenly matched. Hinata then surprised Neji by performing an expert hop kick toward Neji's chin. Neji backed away from it, but his surprise broke his concentration and he fell into the water. Hinata openly chuckled before unzipping her jacket and throwing it off to her right into the water. It sunk down into the dark depths. Hinata was revealed to be wearing a loose fishnet shirt that exposed her belly button. She jumped high into the air in a backwards position and landed with her back to the water. The water surged forth, obscuring Hinata from view. Once the water settled, Hinata was no longer in view. Neji came above the water and stayed a few moments in a doggy position before slowly getting up in a standing position. He shook the water out of his hair and coughed out the water he had accidentally ingested. He slowly studied his feet so the mistake wouldn't happen twice. As he was about to reactivate his Byakugan, a water dragon emerged from behind him. Neji's eyes widened in surprise as he turned around. He quickly turned full circle and began running away from the agile water dragon. The dragon roared as it got closer and tried to take a few bites at Neji. Neji ran toward the side walls and jumped onto the walls to stand sideways below the spectators' area. He ran across the wall at a faster pace than when he ran in water. The water dragon continued to try its biting to no avail. The water dragon got back to its starting position while roaring loudly at the sky. Neji continued to run around the walls at a quick pace, hoping he would be able to outrun the dragon if it decided to come at him once more. The water dragon followed Neji with its slow body movements, and Hinata launched it to where she believed Neji would be. Neji jumped away from the wall the very last moment before the dragon slammed into it, but the torrent of water from the impact slammed into him. Water assaulted him for several minutes before he was able to get back up on the water and remain steady. He activated his Byakugan and turned to where he saw Hinata staring at him with a devilish smile. Neji took several shuriken from his pouch and threw them at her in a swift and precise manner. Hinata got into the gentle fist battle position and then started spinning. Neji stared in abject shock. "Hakusho Kaden!" yelled Hinata with a hint of laughter. She caught all the shuriken easily and tossed them into the water. "I suggest applying real effort in this fight." Neji glared in contempt as she appeared bemused. He realized that he had severely and stupidly underestimated his cousin. He needed to keep the match close range if he wanted to win. He was sure Hinata wasn't stronger than him in hand-to-hand taijutsu combat. Neji ran at Hinata in a hasty pace. He was desperate to reach her to take advantage of short-ranged combat. Hinata kicked water in Neji's direction and began to go through 3 quick seals. "Sweden! Mizuhari!" shouted Hinata. Water needles sprayed in Neji's direction. Neji quickly stopped his movements with a frustrated look on his face. "Hakusho Kaden!" bellowed Neji angrily. The water needles bounced off the spinning chakra shield easily. "Do not think that you can win this match so easily. Sorry if I'm making you fight fate," responded Hinata sarcastically. She wanted to destroy those beliefs of his. "Shut up," snarled Neji. He lost his composure entirely. His face grew red with anger. "What the hell would you know? You have no idea what it's like. No idea. My entire life has no meaning besides being a fucking slave." Hinata appeared taken aback by this admission. She stared at Neji, unable to rebuke him. He stared hatefully at his cousin. The spectators seemed to gain more interest by this secret confession. "You, the main branch, Hiyashi-sama, and Konoha itself, all of you. What the fuck do any of you know? We cadet branch live only to serve as slave labor. We have to swear oaths of fealty to the main branch, to the Hokage, and to the village, and all we ever get in return is being exploited by all of them. Our Konoha pay stubs are given to the main branch. None of us are allowed to have dreams to aspire to like the rest of you. There will never ever be a day when a cadet branch member ever becomes Hokage, and who we marry to have children with is determined by the main branch. Our future generations will only live their lives in the same servitude as us. We serve by cooking, cleaning, picking the shit up of main branch members, and hell, sometimes a bored main branch member will lower themselves by deciding to fornicate with a cadet branch member of their choice whenever it pleases them." The onlookers gawked at this raging admission. The Hokage clenched his teeth in anger at Neji's display of hatred. Team Uzumaki seemed amused. Naruto looked on sadly at Neji's wrathful confession. Sasuke was contemplative as he mulled over the information Neji had just shouted, and Sakura appeared depressed over hearing the admissions. The rest of the teams either looked disgusted or contemplative. There were rumors in Konoha about the cadet branch's treatment, and the lack of pay was a stipulation that had been around since the Shadaime's era. It was done to bolster the support of the Hyuga clan and to protect their bloodline clan rights. The cadet branch was a long overlooked issue that many who had basic freedoms outright ignored. "Don't tell me that my beliefs are stupid," continued Neji, snarling in rage. "What else could make sense of all this? That it was a mere accident of birth that we are not free. That the government we fight for, our own family, and our fellow citizens, won't acknowledge us as people because we just happen to be born in the wrong side of the clan. That we have this caged bird seal that can kill us at any moment because people just made up a bunch of rules. It was God who bound us to this life. Slaves are to obey their masters in the same vein they are to serve the Lord. We are the property of our masters as we are properties of the Lord. That is the only way this makes sense. That is the only way so many people could approve of this and see this as right, as just. Our slavery is God's institution of labor. We are fated to behave as God decreed. That is what I truly believe. Neji rushed forth toward Hinata in a blind fit of rage. Hinata stood stunned by his words for several seconds. She had never truly contemplated the perspective of the cadet branch for 6 years. She felt shame swell inside of her for never showing concern for what had obviously psychologically broken Neji's mind ever since his father was used as a sacrifice instead of Hiashi to appease Kumogakure's warmongers. Neji struck at Hinata intending to do the first 2 strikes of 8 trigrams 64 palms, but Hinata briefly spun around to use her own variation of Hakusho Kaden as chakra walls to block his attacks. Neji's attack was rebounded and his arms were forced backwards from the block. Hinata struck hard and fast with a palm strike to his sternum. The water behind Neji pushed away in a straight line from the intense chakra blow before Neji's body was pushed backwards into the air. He was blown backwards and rolled on top of the water through the sheer velocity of the strike. Neji was able to stop himself by skidding backwards on the water before being able to maintain his feet on top of the water. Suiryuden no Jutsu, bellowed Hinata as she rapidly went through the hand seals. Neji ran toward the wall at full speed. Unfortunately, he was far too late this time. Hinata had immediately sent the water dragon jutsu rushing toward him and it was able to slam into Neji head first. Neji felt his body get slammed to the back wall before the torrential whirlpool of water pushed and pulled his body like a ragdoll within the murky depths of the water. Nausea slowly began to set in. He forced himself to stay conscious and swam to the top of the body of water after the damage was done. Neji breathed in much needed air as he coughed out water from his lungs. He placed his palms on the surface of the water to pull himself up and was able to steady himself on the water once more. He activated his Byakugan only to have the water below him swarm up like a cocoon and trap him inside a large ball of water. He stared to his side to find Hinata with a hand on the ball of water. Suiryuden no Jutsu, said Hinata with a hand forming a half seal. Give up. If you don't, you shall lose regardless. Neji stubbornly and hatefully glared at her. He refused to give up. Slowly, however, as he struggled, the water became denser and his movements grew slower. It was apparent that there would be no getting out of the water prison jutsu. Neji soon slipped out of consciousness. Participant Hyuga Neji is unable to battle, declared Hayate, raising his hand. Participant Hyuga Hinata as the victor. Once the match was over, Hinata dispersed of her jutsu and began walking back to the spectators' box. She had turned away from Neji in order to focus on her future schemes. Her mind was preoccupied with thoughts of the best course of action in placing Naruto into the Hyuga clan. She had exhausted a great degree of her reserves using the 2 water dragon jutsu. Neji regained consciousness and looked around confused. Upon looking at the surprised faces of the crowd, he realized what had just happened. Feeling a mixture of humiliation and frustration, Neji rose up with unabated anger surging within him. He had lost his chance. Neji stared at Hinata's exposed back for a few brief seconds as she was walking away and decided to pounce on the opportunity. The Byakugan only had 359 degrees of sight. She wouldn't see the strike coming. He ran at her with all his speed. There were several cries of, "Watch out! Behind you, Hinata, duck!" But it was to no avail. Hinata turned around in surprise just as Neji slammed his fingers between her chest. Hinata made a few gurgles as she began coughing up blood while Neji's fingers seemed to act like a sword that had pierced through her heart. Why? She managed to gurgle out before her eyes rolled to the back of her head. Hinata! No! Cried Kurenai in horror. Hinata! Screeched Kiba in panic. Many of the spectators were stunned. Sasuke and Sakura appeared horrified at what happened to the kunoichi who had worked so hard to save their lives. Naruto's eyes widened in shock as he slowly began shaking his head in denial. This isn't happening, this isn't happening. The mantra overloaded his mind in a desperate attempt of denial. Surely, she had used a substitution jutsu at the last moment. Please no, not her, not Hinata. No, no, no. Hinata, please be okay. Maida Guy gazed in a mix of horror and self-loathing as he had clearly failed Neji in his training. He had focused too much attention on helping Lee overcome his disabilities that he had failed Tenten and Neji. That was horribly clear now. He had never noticed how damaged Neji was. Hinata fell backwards into the water and sunk down into the dark depths. The spectators reacted in a panic to what appeared to be a deliberate murder. Hayate cursed aloud at having failed to stop it in time. The Hokage bellowed orders demanding people to stay calm. Neji gave a soft smile of happiness at having irrationally been able to let loose his pent-up hatred. He wasn't aware of the outside world around him. However, his vision was soon obscured by the eyes of God himself. Neji's eyes stared demurely in confusion before he was suddenly blasted painfully across the battleground. He slammed headfirst into the back wall where he immediately lost consciousness due to the velocity of the ferocious impact. His body fell back into the water where he lay unconscious on the surface of the water. Naruto had purposefully broken the flow of chakra in his legs to fall into the water after having blown Neji into the wall with an emotionally charged Shinra Tensei that had caused his Rinnegan to briefly flicker into existence. He had openly abandoned all pretense of their carefully guarded secret. Hinata's life was in serious danger. He reactivated his Rinnegan as he desperately searched for Hinata within the large body of water. I have to find her, I have to find her, I have to find her. Thought Naruto in grave turmoil. She's not dead. She is not dead. I won't allow this to happen. Not her. Arrrgh fucking Neji. I will fucking cut him to pieces if I don't find her. How could the proctor allow this to happen? I need to find her fast. Naruto finally managed to spot her body sinking slowly into the water. He quickly used Shunshin to get to her and held her securely in a bridal-style position before swimming up as swiftly as possible. He had deactivated his Rinnegan as he came up above water gasping for air. He Shunshined to the surface of the water and expertly kept his feet steady while slowly walking over to the awaiting stretcher. Move away, you filth. One of the medics forcefully grabbed Hinata while another pushed him away. Naruto was frustrated that they put their biases against him for being a demon spawn, above caring for their patient. Kakashi arrived behind Naruto and firmly held his shoulder. Kurenai was talking to several medics nearby the stretcher about Hinata's condition. Maida Guy had walked toward the second stretcher that had emerged while Naruto had been searching for Hinata and carefully placed Neji's fallen body onto it. Naruto was glad all the medics were trained shinobi who could stand on water. The stretchers seemed to have chakra seals that kept them above water too. It seemed the medics truly were trained for just about every occurrence. The medics walked back to the infirmary with both unconscious Hyuga clan members. Naruto despairingly noticed an oxygen mask being placed over Hinata's face as they left. Kurenai grudgingly decided not to follow after them because she still had a duty to her two other charges. The four shinobi on the field shunshined back to their respective spots on the spectator area. Hayate looked shamefaced at being unable to stop what had happened. Silence deafened the tower as the genin participants and Junin mulled over the rapid events that transpired and the revelations thereof. Kushina had watched silently and openly snorted in disgust when she had seen the failure able to push the Hyuga boy to the far wall in what appeared to be a demonic chakra blast. She hadn't used her chakra sensing ability to see the cause, but she had decided that she didn't need to. It was glaringly obvious that the failure had begun using the demon's power. How else could he have done such an attack? Kushina decided that she would forgive Yakumo for her disgraceful defeat due to this unexpected truth that had just surfaced. The failure was attempting to use the Kyuubi no Yoko's power to gain the upper hand in the Chunin exams to even out his lack of real shinobi skills. She had no idea why he had an attachment to the Hyuga heiress and she didn't care to know. The Hyuga falling in the opinion of Konoha's general public would only help bring rise to the fame of the Uzumaki clan. She would leave all the Uzumaki clan's expectations on Idate. If he didn't succeed in his match, then he clearly wasn't the one that she was looking for to lead the Uzumaki clan to unprecedented prosperity. The next match was called on the electronic board. Aburame Shino vs Uzumaki Idate. Idate smirked confidently as he jumped over the rails and stood firmly on the battleground. Aburame Shino slowly walked down the stairs and walked on the water with ease before walking to his designated position on the field of water. The Aburame clan was one of the most precise in learning chakra control skills earlier on in their shinobi careers. It was a necessity for them because of their control of Kikachu insects. Once Hayate ordered the match to begin, Shino raised his hand up immediately. "I give up," intoned Shino. Some of the Konoha genin gawked in surprise. "There is no hope for me to defeat you because of your inherent abilities. It would be even more catastrophic in the current terrain." "What?" bellowed Ino, annoyed. "Why didn't you just say you give up before walking down there?" Shino turned to Ino to address her question. Many of the Konoha genin were wondering the same thing. "The rules require me to be present on the battleground to announce my defeat," said Shino, shrugging. "That is the format in which the rules are organized." "Participant Aburame Shino admits defeat," said Hayate, making it official. "Participant Uzumaki Idate wins the match." Shino walked back to the spectator area while Idate kept his arrogant smirk as he made a few hand seals before shining back next to Kushina's side. Kiba met with Shino as he walked back to Kurenai's side. Now that Hinata was out of sight, Kiba felt more like his old self. Kiba had been pulled back by Kurenai to make sure he didn't assault Neji and possibly get himself disqualified. Kurenai had been forced to place him under a brief genjutsu to keep him from attacking Neji like Naruto had. The genjutsu had vanished once Kurenai had made it back to the spectator's box, and Kurenai had patiently explained to Kiba that the medics would give Hinata the best care available because Hinata would be receiving care from the special ward reserved for wealthy bloodline clans. "Shino, I can't believe you," said Kiba in clear annoyance. Shino shrugged mildly. "Don't just shrug at me. You could have at least tried fighting him." "Kiba-san," began Shino, turning around to meet his teammate in the eyes, "there are times when it is better to flee from your opponent to fight another day than to needlessly engage in a life or death battle and perish in its wake." "Bullshit," shouted Kiba rashly. "You're just making up cowardly excuses. You were afraid of that guy in the forest of death, weren't you? Look, I lost against him too, but if it had been my match then I would have fought him and I'd have done my best to win. Fuck life-threatening danger. You don't get anywhere without risks." "That is not the same, Kiba," replied Shino in a placating voice. "It is best not to take unnecessary risks when the danger could be your life." "You just don't get it," said Kiba, throwing his arms in the air to show his annoyance. "Just forget it. I'm just saying that I could take that guy with enough training. I'll get stronger and prove it after I beat the punk in my match." The next match was announced. Dosu landed lightly on the surface of the water to face Choji. Choji nervously walked down the stairs and fell into the water once he was deep inside enough. Choji raised himself to the surface, swishing wildly about, coughing up water. Help. I can't swim," cried Choji in a panic. "My body's too large. I never learned. Help." The entire crowd stared stupidly at the confession. A shinobi who never learned to swim. It was downright pathetic. Asuma slammed his palm to his face as he had never thought to ask Choji if he knew such a rudimentary shinobi skill. This was an embarrassment. Hayate sighed in exasperation and called the match in Dosu's favor. Dosu was relieved. He had exhausted most of his chakra reserves just getting to the tower on time, and he had never been able to fix his sound arm from the damage the kunai had done in the Forest of Death. The matches beforehand had helped him rest, but his reserves were still very weak at the moment. "Dumb fatass," drawled Dosu, shaking his head. Unfortunately, Choji had heard and got angry. He used his family's body rolling jutsu and spun himself so quickly that he was able to maintain his body's surface on the water. Dosu's eye widened at the unexpected attack. "Oh she!" Choji slammed into him and knocked him out cold. Hayate slammed his palm to his forehead because he had already called the match. The proctor had to make sure the contestant couldn't battle anymore before calling the match. The Hokage would judge this as a bad decision on Hayate's part. Hinata and Neji's match didn't qualify under the same stipulation because Hayate had called the match before Neji would suffocate to death. Neji's attack afterwards was what he should have been able to put a stop to. The medics rushed in and carried both of them away. Choji had hit his head on the far wall and knocked himself unconscious after knocking Dosu unconscious. Idate, Konkuro, and Kiba rambunctiously laughed at the events that unfolded. Ino interchanged her glares towards all three of them. Sasuke, Sakura, and Naruto tried to hide their guilty smiles. Shikamaru and Shino kept silent and betrayed nothing. Shikamaru appeared more worried than contemplative. The last match was called on the electronic board. Rock Lee vs. Sabaku no Gaara. Lee unraveled and tossed a thick scroll onto the battleground. He bit his thumb and drew a pattern onto his right palm. He jumped high in the air and slammed his right hand onto the scroll floating in the water. The scroll shined brightly before it began to seemingly absorb all the water in the battleground at an unprecedented rate. Lee made a backflip and grabbed the scroll to put it away in his green spandex jumpsuit. Lee was glad that his teammate Tenten was a fanatic weapons mistress. If not for her, he would have no way of facing the sand shinobi in front of him. She had helped teach him scroll sealing for even advanced seals of terrain elements so that he wouldn't be disadvantaged on their C-rank missions with Meta Guy. Although Gaara's sand would be at a severe disadvantage in the watery terrain, Lee would have been more disadvantaged because he would have had to exert himself at a rapid pace just to keep afloat on the water since he couldn't do any ninjutsu or chakra control for water walking. Once that was out of the picture, Rock Lee and Sabaku no Gaara began what would be the highlight of the preliminary Chunin exams. After a fantastic performance in Gaara's victory, Naruto couldn't help but feel angered because Gaara chose to crush Rock Lee's arm and leg after it was clear that Lee couldn't fight. Meta Guy had stepped in knowing he would be judged even more unfavorably since his entire squad had lost and two of them had clear deficiencies that Guy had failed to take care of. While making his way up the stairs, Gaara had briefly caught Naruto's eyes and gave him a visage of contempt. Naruto instantly recognized what that meant. Gaara was aware of Naruto being a Jinchuriki. Naruto had sensed the other boy's chakra to recognize the similarities, but he had no idea how Gaara found out about him. The exams were becoming far more dangerous. The last match was over. Hayate called the genin spectators to come forward onto the ravaged battleground as they brought a raffle box to make a selection of who would face each other in the final public examination. Each contestant took a raffle number when they were called, with the exception of those that were in the infirmary due to unforeseen circumstances. Kiba, having been unable to fight in the preliminaries, was allowed to take a raffle paper first. Once Hayate called all the numbers, the other proctors set up the matches on the electronic board. Nara Shikamaru vs. Sabaku no Tamari. Haruno Sakura vs. Inuzuka Kiba. Uzumaki Idate vs. Uzumaki Naruto. Hyuga Hinata vs. Dosu. Sabaku no Gaara vs. Uchiha Sasuke. Kankuro would be on reserve if one of the contestants failed to make it to the exam. Otherwise, he would participate in the semifinals against one of the winning contestants. Once they were all free to leave, Naruto gave a quick farewell to his teammates and Sunshine to the Konoha hospital. The tower was being closed for the remainder of the day, so the injured or unconscious genin had already been moved to the hospital. Naruto Sunshined outside of the hospital room where he sensed Hinata's chakra. He hadn't even bothered going to the receptionist because he knew that he wouldn't be allowed anywhere near Hinata's room. He had used his best detection avoiding abilities like in his match with Yakumo. Naruto gently opened the door and walked inside. His heart plummeted when he noticed the breathing mask, Hinata's face scrunched in pain, and a cup with blood in it by her bedside. Hinata opened her eyes to gaze in his direction silently before raising herself up slowly and removing the breathing mask. She swiftly took the cup of blood and began coughing blood into it. She held her chest in clear pain from the exertion she was putting forth. Naruto brushed away the grimness that was slowly overtaking his mind as he helplessly noticed this. Hinata put the cup back by her bedside drawer and turned to face him expectantly. She wiped away the blood on her lips with the back of her left hand. "Hey, I came because I was worried," admitted Naruto, shrugging. "It's probably nothing, I'm sure the doctors will find a way to." "Close the door," said Hinata in a clipped tone. It brooked no room for argument. Naruto followed her instructions. "Lock it." Naruto locked the door and walked toward her bedside. He felt out of place. He didn't exactly know how to comfort her and he had no idea when she would get better. He tried to think of something quickly. Hinata looked down on at her bed sheets sullenly as she began gripping them tightly. An air of depressive awkwardness hung over them. Naruto wasn't sure what to make of it. He didn't want to break the silence by saying something stupid, and he wasn't really sure when she would be out of the hospital. Perhaps she was depressed because the doctors told her she wouldn't be able to participate in the Chunin exam finals. It was a possibility. Naruto, said Hinata demurely. She gazed back up at him. Her cheeks were streaked with tears. Naruto gazed at her in concern. I'm dying. Naruto's world shattered.